let's take a step back and perhaps start off with a couple of different counties. So let's start off with
Please.
Hale County in Alabama and Bamberg County in South Carolina. Now, these two counties are about 450 miles apart. They both have populations around 16,000 or so. And they are both about 60% African American. They are poor southern counties. They have they're well below the state's median incomes. Unfortunately, they're both named after Confederate officers. Not an unusual precedent in the South, but the interesting thing about them, though, is that in almost every presidential election since the 70s, both of those counties have voted Democrat. They're well over 50% Democrat every single election, including the last one. I was just checking this morning in preparation for this to make sure that also holds. And so the question is why do these two counties in the South, in a traditionally Republican-leaning regions, why would these two counties be unique in a whole string of counties through the South that along a belt? That why would these vote Democrat? Well, so it sort of goes back to a 100-million-year-old coastline that used to exist. So if you go back to the Cretaceous period, starting around 139 million years ago up to about 65 million years ago, most of the southern part of the U.S. was covered by shallow seas. Now, this is also a warm phase of our climate, and so this is extremely warm oceans as well. And so these warm tropical waters, they give rise to a variety of tiny marine plankton that have these carbonate skeletons. And over time, those accumulate in these massive chalk formations around at that point, these coasts. And that chalk was alkaline, it was porous, which eventually led to sort of these well-drained and fertile soils along this belt in a band that sort of mirrors this ancient coastline. And that became an arc of sort of rich and dark soils throughout the South, and particularly in Alabama, which, because of those dark, rich soils, that band became known as the Black Belt for the soils originally. And in fact, Booker T. Washington, in his 1901 autobiography, even mentioned the concept that this was sort of termed, that was designated as the Black Belt. Now, because the soils in these areas were so productive, then they were productive regions and productive belt for cotton. And in a time when cotton production was heavy throughout the South, these regions, would have orders of magnitude more cotton production. And so because of that high cotton production, that's where most of the larger Southern slavery plantations were. And of course, the higher proportions of slaves to sort of accommodate that increased cotton production. And then of course, over time, as time goes on and things have played out, of course, the African Americans, largely as descendants of those slaves, have largely stayed in those regions. And so those counties continue to have a very high African American population compared to the South. And so of course, as African Americans typically lean Democrat in their voting patterns, those counties continue to represent a band of Democratic voting throughout the South. Interestingly, if you, I don't know if you can bring back up the map of county voting patterns that you showed a little while ago. Right there, if you also notice along the Mississippi, right? So this is also an area of heavy agricultural production. Again, not tied to that ancient coastline, but those are areas also of traditionally increased cotton production, increased plantations, and increased African-American populations. And so by another sort of environmental process, they're just being the rich, fertile soils along the Mississippi River, you get somewhat of a similar pattern.